Good morning, and welcome to the second talk in our Moses, Motown and Me series. And it's a series in which, as the title suggests, we're going to be trying to weave a sort of a continuous thread between the storylines and the theology that lay behind the events of the 13th century BC and 2020. So over the next few minutes, I'm going to be sharing with you some of my thoughts about one of the best known stories in the Bible, and that's the account that we find in Exodus chapter 3 of Moses and the burning bush. But before that, let's have a quick recap. Now, last week when Joe spoke to us, he focused very much on the bravery of the women who feature in the story of Moses' early life, and their belief that no matter what risks they had to take, they needed to trust God. And Joe took us to the stage where Moses, by birth a Jew, but who was being brought up in Pharaoh's palace, was a well-educated, militarily astute, and although it would appear perhaps somewhat lacking in self-confidence, what you might call a well-groomed young man. However, by the time I pick up the story, because Moses had involved himself in what you might call a racially fueled dispute, a clash between an Egyptian slave master and an Israelite, which ended up with Moses intervening and killing the Egyptian, he'd fled from Egypt, he'd fled from the royal palace, he was married, and he was working as a shepherd in a place called Midian. So, part 2. I wonder if, like Moses, you've ever been asked to do something that you've considered to be way beyond your capabilities. Something way beyond your comfort zone. Or, as I believe they say nowadays, something above your pay grade. I think my most vivid recollection of something like this was more than 20 years ago now, when after 35 years of working in the newspaper industry, I was sort of gracefully shunted off into ill health retirement. And I enrolled at what used to be called Park Lane College to take a GCSE in English. Now, whilst this is probably the daftest comparison imaginable, when all those years ago, a somewhat eccentric English lecturer told me that she was recommending me for a place on a mature access course, a sort of a fast track by which, if you applied yourself, even oldies like me could get to university. I can't help but think that at that precise moment, and maybe just for a second, I might have experienced just a tiny, tiny fraction of the doubt and the uncertainty that Moses, an Israelite by birth, a shepherd who, as far as we know, was happily married to a Midianite priest's daughter, how he felt when God sort of barged his way into his comfort zone and said he needed him to journey back to the country which, as an adopted member of the royal family, he'd just run away from, and demand that its ruler, Pharaoh, free more than 600,000 Israelite slaves, and while he's at it, grant them safe passage to Canaan. What? Who? Me? Now, these days, if you're given an instruction to do something which you feel uncomfortable about, the chances are that if it doesn't come face to face, it'll most likely come by a call to your mobile phone, or it might come in a text or possibly an email. The one thing I can guarantee is it certainly won't come from a voice enveloped by a burning bush, who, when asked who he was, replied, "Never mind that, I am who I am." Of course, with Moses, we know what happened next. And if you don't, well, don't worry too much, because you'll find out next week. But here was a man who, by his own admission, got tongue-tied at even just the thought of speaking in public. He needed much more persuading. In fact, to be honest, if he was going to engage with the idea of doing what God was asking of him, he needed a copper-bottomed assurance that as and when push came to shove, he wasn't going to be left on his own. So, to bolster Moses' confidence, and of course later to prove his power to Pharaoh, God performed a number of miracles. He turned sticks into snakes and back again. He turned water into blood. And he put leprosy, scales of leprosy on Moses' hand, that as he took his hand in and out of his gown, they came and went. But still Moses wasn't convinced. Time, you could say, for God to play his ace. And he does this by telling our reluctant hero that to help him put his case, he's even managed to arrange for him to be reunited with his long-lost brother Aaron, and that it'll be he who will be doing the talking. Deal. Of course, what follows is one of the most chilling narratives in the entire Bible. It starts with Moses and Aaron receiving a none-too-friendly welcome from a new Pharaoh, and before it ends, it describes in great detail how God blights Egypt. He blights it with 10 disasters, namely 7 plagues, the worst storm ever, 3 days of total darkness, and of course the slaughter of thousands of young Egyptian children. Now, I'm not going to suggest that as Moses was, you or I are about to be charged with leading anyone who is a victim of modern day slavery into a land of milk and honey. But surely, if we're to take our faith, and by that I mean our response to Jesus' death and resurrection, as seriously as we should, isn't being prepared to do what Moses did, that's step out of his comfort zone, speak out, take risks, and perhaps even on occasions put ourselves in the firing line, isn't that what being a Christian's all about? And this issue of being taken out of our comfort zones is, as I'm sure you'll agree, something that we've all experienced over these last few months. I mean, just a short time ago, the things we did without even thinking, simple stuff like walking down the road, hopping on a bus or popping into Sainsbury's, they've all taken on a whole new dynamic with social distancing, with hand sanitising, with card-only payments, and of course with face masks becoming, if not the new norm, then certainly modelling as stepping stones to what the new norm might eventually look like. But since the end of March, when field hospitals were being built in a matter of days, when the R rate was going up and down like a fiddler's elbow, and where in certain parts of the UK, lockdowns went on, came off, and now have gone on again, the hardships, the sadness, and the bereavement that we've all either heard about or indeed possibly experienced firsthand have, I think, set in motion an enormous wave of goodwill, an enormous wave of friendship and compassion. And I honestly believe that much of this has come about because people, ordinary people, have been willing to step outside their comfort zones. Although I'd hardly call it compassion here at church, particularly during our online services, there have been times when I've almost cried with laughter when I've seen people I've known for years doing stuff that I just never thought they'd have in them. And then, I suppose you could say at the other end of the rainbow, I've heard some wonderful stories about what our pastoral team have been doing, about how Carol and our seniors team have been keeping in touch with people, about how Shelley and our children's team they've adapted their programs. They've adapted their Sunday morning programs. They've adopted Oasis. They've adopted Mortots. And they've adopted them all from online to online, from in-house to online. And indeed, I've heard about many individuals who, well, they've been more than willing to walk that extra mile. and provide practical or emotional comfort and support. Nor, of course, should we forget those millions of people who back in March, beginning of April, they began working from home. And what about those, well, those who never stopped going to work? Doctors, nurses, teachers, supermarket staff, bin men, police, fire, ambulance, clergy, etc., etc. I'd be a very brave man if I didn't acknowledge just how well each and every one of these good people have responded when they've been driven to abandon much of the familiarity and the security that their personal comfort zones provided. So what of the future? Where, as Christians, might our travels take us as the entire world strives to discover a formula that will master COVID-19? And when we reach journey's end, at this moment in time, an unknown destination, what, I wonder, might our new comfort zones look and feel like? Obviously, I don't know. But I pray that however long that journey takes, and wherever we find ourselves, we'll never forget that whilst there may have been times when God felt far away, just as he was with Moses and the Israelites, in actual fact, he's been with us every step of the way. Now, if any eminent theologians are watching this, I'm sure that what I'm going to close by saying might actually sound utter nonsense. And if it is, if it does, I'm sure you'll tell me. But dare I suggest that when it comes to stepping out of our comfort zones, there may be one advantage that we have over Moses. And that's that when God picked Moses to liberate the Israelites, he chose to stay hidden from view. We, however, have the benefit of God having chosen to reveal himself in a very accessible and a very recognizable way. And to me, this means that whilst there are many, many things that I will never understand about God the Father, one thing I am sure of is that in the Garden of Gethsemane, and then more crucially at Calvary, the example set by Jesus, the example set by God the Son, was, is, and forever shall be the model that I need to follow. Amen.